Near the #1 People's Hospital in Yulin, nestled in Guangxi Province, China, a cluster of self-built homes stands shoulder to shoulder. Though weathered and surrounded by a less than ideal environment, the area buzzes with life, its proximity to the hospital drawing a steady crowd of residents. On March 2020, in a modest boarding house less than 200 meters from the hospital, a nurse living on the second floor noticed something odd. Her room's drainage pipe had suddenly clogged. Sensing trouble, she called her boyfriend, a police officer, to investigate. Together they alerted the landlord to tackle the issue. When they pried open the waste pipe, a grisly sight stopped them cold. A mass of shredded flesh jammed inside. The bizarre discovery left everyone reeling. Who would flush such a quantity of meat down a drain? This was no ordinary mishap. The landlord wasted no time contacting the police. When authorities arrived and probed deeper, they extracted a staggering 2,068 fragments of flesh from the pipe. But the real horror hit with the forensic report. These weren't animal remains, they were human tissue. A chilling hush fell over the complex. Officers swiftly canvassed suspicious rooms. On the third floor, they uncovered a rice cooker stuffed with human flesh in one corner and a black plastic bag holding more body parts. Who was the victim? Why had they met such a ruthless end? And what about the tenant on the third floor? Could they be the killer? You're watching True Crime in the World, where we explore the most puzzling cases and most gripping stories. As usual, before we begin unraveling today's mystery, please leave us a like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much. That same afternoon, March 26, 20, as the tenant from the third floor room headed home from work, police apprehended her on the spot. When they saw the suspect, disbelief rippled through the scene. A petite young woman with a slender frame, her ponytail swinging, and her gentle face suggesting innocence. She looked more like a harmless schoolgirl than a hardened criminal. Yet beneath that fragile exterior lurked a ghastly truth. What she'd done was unthinkable. The suspect was Li Fengping, 25, a nurse at Yulin's #1 People's Hospital. At the station, she confessed with eerie calm. She'd murdered Luo Peng, the hospital's deputy chief of spinal surgery, then disposed of him by dissolving his body and flushing it down the drain. Just days earlier, police had fielded a call from Luo Peng's wife, reporting her husband missing for 2 days. What tied Li Fengping to Luo Peng? Why had it ended in such a macabre crime? What drove this savage act? The answers began trickling out as the investigation unfolded. In 2017, Li Fengping graduated from Guangxi Medical University with strong marks, earning job offers from 3 hospitals through the school's recruitment program. One was in Nanning, the provincial capital, brimming with career prospects. Another in Liuzhou dangled the highest salary. The third, Yulin's #1 People's Hospital, offered neither top pay nor advancement but held a crucial edge: proximity to home. A mere 2-hour taxi ride to Bobi County, where her gravely ill mother lived, meant she could rush back to care for her if needed. After weighing it with her father, Li Fengping chose Yulin, sacrificing higher wages and broader horizons to stay close to family. But life didn't unfold as she'd hoped. Aside from the China New Year, Li Fengping rarely made it home. She rented a cramped 30-square-meter room in an alley behind the hospital. Though old, tight, and run down, it cost just 350 yuan a month, about 50, letting her stretch her meager budget. When she started at the hospital, she entered a mandatory 3-year rotation program for young doctors and nurses, a grueling initiation before settling into a fixed department. Every few months, she'd switch wards. Each shift a reset, back to square one as a novice nurse doing grunt work. Her pay was paltry, hovering between 2,000 and 3,000 yuan monthly, roughly 280 to 420. After years, it might climb to 7,000 or 8,000 yuan, 980 to 120, but there was no guarantee she wouldn't be uprooted again, starting from scratch. The relentless rotation bred instability, leaving young nurses like her adrift, anxious, bobbing like waterweed in the hospital's currents. In June 2018, Li Fengping landed in the neonatal ward, later moving to spinal surgery. One night shift, chatting with colleagues, she was introduced to an online betting game. At her first trial, she dodged questions about who tipped her off. Even under her lawyer's probing, she clammed up, insisting the colleague had no tie to her crime. Only at the second hearing did a name surface: Liu Maoxia. Liu, the hospital's head nurse, had unwittingly nudged Li Fengping toward gambling. Initially, Li saw it as a side hustle to ease financial strain. Buying a house loomed large. Liu testified the game was straightforward. She'd bet lightly at first, but once lost over 100 yuan, about 14, in a single round. Sensing danger, Liu quit, uninstalled it, and warned Li Fengping to treat it as a lark. Neither foresaw how that casual nudge would shove Li down a merciless path. This online lottery game required no phone registration or ID, just boundless betting. Players picked numbers from 10 Arabic digit groups, 1 to 10. Newbies won early rounds, lulled into thinking it was easy money, but the system was rigged, a trap to reel gamblers into a losing spiral. Li Fengping fell fast into its grip. Her bets started small, hundreds of yuan, then ballooned to tens of thousands. Some days, she'd drop hundreds of thousands in one go, up to 14,000. Still, she couldn't stop, clinging to the dream that one big win would turn it all around. Her peak haul hit 100,000 yuan, about $14,000 in a day. What she didn't grasp was the game's iron grip. No one won long term, no player walked away ahead. Within a year, her 2 bank cards funneled 0.9 million yuan, over 400,000, into the platform. For a nurse barely 3 years on the job, it was a staggering sum. Debt piled up, spiraling beyond her control. Desperation clawed at her. She needed cash. And right then, a chilling plan took root in her mind. Unwilling to fold, Li Fengping hatched a scheme. Borrow money to gamble, win big, pay it off, like raising chickens for eggs. She started borrowing everywhere, spinning tales of her mother's cervical cancer to tap colleagues' sympathy. Her bright, lively demeanor and diligent work ethic had earned their trust. The hospital's sterling reputation only bolstered her credibility. No one doubted her story. At first, Li Fengping borrowed just a few thousand yuan, small sums. Each paycheck, she'd repay a fraction, building trust and coaxing more help from colleagues. But soon, the frequency spiked, the amounts ballooned, and her coworkers' wallets became a revolving fund. No matter how much she raked in, it couldn't fill the gaping financial pit she'd plunged into. In July 20, Li secured a 300,000 yuan loan, about 42,000, from the Bank of China through a healthcare worker assistance program in Yulin. Still, it wasn't enough. She kept hitting up colleagues, spinning tales of her mother's illness, a wedding, a house purchase. Older nurses grew wary and shut her down, but younger ones, bonded by friendship, kept lending. Some even used their own IDs to borrow 300,000 yuan each, 42,000 apiece on her behalf. Trusting her, they never pressed for repayment. By the time the truth unraveled, that money remained unpaid. Meanwhile, neck deep in debt, Li never turned to her family. When coworkers' generosity dried up, she tapped online lending platforms. In 6 months, her bank records brimmed with loans from countless sources. She borrowed from any corner she could, heedless of sky-high interest rates, often exceeding the legal cap of 36% annually. The deeper she sank into gambling, the more her psyche split. On one hand, she flung hundreds of thousands of yuan daily into online bets, sometimes more, her pulse steady as stone. On the other, her personal life clung to frugality, holed up in that dilapidated 350 yuan rental, about 50 a month. When eyeing a fridge, she'd agonize, debating the expense, only to order a cheap one off Taobao for a few hundred yuan. Under 50, millions squandered on bets, yet hesitating over pocket change. That dissonance was Li Fengping's greatest tragedy. By October 20, despair swallowed her whole. Debt towered, options evaporated. She turned to Luo Peng, deputy chief of spinal surgery, for a loan. At 51, he drove a BMW SUV and had a daughter in high school. Word around the hospital pegged him as wealthy. When Li pleaded her case, Luo agreed to lend, on one condition. They arranged to meet at an upscale hotel near the hospital. For Li Fengping, it was a fateful day that altered her life's course. Stepping into the room, she froze. Luo Peng stood naked. She turned to bolt, but he barred her escape. Under his coercion, she relented, forced to comply. The next morning, Li pocketed 50,000 yuan, about 7,000, but the cash wasn't the prize. Humiliation seared into her soul. It didn't end there. Despite the rage and resistance boiling inside, she had to submit to Luo Ping repeatedly at that hotel. From October 20 to February 20, they met 13 times. After each encounter, Luo wired her money. By March 20, she'd collected 200,000 yuan, roughly 28,000. But alongside the funds came festering resentment and shame. Luo Peng, though, wasn't sated. He began to threaten. "Think you can slip away from me? I've got contacts in security and the prosecutor's office. Cross me and I'll make sure you regret it." His intimidation gripped her with terror. A rural girl who had clawed her way through school for this job, she felt cornered. By 20, Li Fengping had slipped into depression. Initially overwhelmed by helplessness, fearing retaliation and harm to her family, she contemplated ending it all. 3 times she tried, and 3 times she failed. The first attempt saw her hoard 100 sleeping pills. Already plagued by insomnia, sleeping just 3 or 4 hours a night, she swallowed 80 in one go. Instead of death, she faced violent nausea, her body rejecting the overdose. The second time, she left the gas on overnight, another flop. For her third bid, she exploited her job, swiping 2 vials of insulin from the hospital and injecting 800 units into herself. Yet, even death turned her away. Li Fengping lingered on, trapped in despair and fury. March 20 rolled in, and COVID-19 shuttered hotels. Unable to book rooms for their trysts, Luo Peng ordered Li Fengping to rent an apartment near the hospital, promising to cover the cost. With no choice, she complied. On the night of March 20th, a drunken Luo showed up. Stumbling through the door, he stripped and demanded her attention. But Li, engrossed in her betting game, brushed him off. She dodged with excuses, hadn't eaten dinner, needed a shower, stoking Luo's temper. He erupted, hurling insults, accusing her of cooling off, even threatening her job. After his tirade, he passed out, snoring loudly across the room. Li Fengping sat on the bed's edge, fists clenched. Humiliation replayed in her mind, resentment surging. The weight of it all snapped her restraint. In a rage, she grabbed her phone and searched. What to do if you hate someone? A suggestion popped up, to make them disappear. Scrolling further, she landed on, how can the weak defeat the strong? That's when Li Fengping made her choice. Around 1 a.m., she grabbed a computer cable and crept toward the bed. Looping it around Luo's neck, she yanked tight. He jolted awake, thrashing wildly. They tumbled to the floor, locked in a struggle, but she held firm. Minutes later, his body stilled. Trembling, she pressed his carotid artery. No pulse. Instinctively, she tried CPR, but it was futile. Luo Peng was gone. Panic surged, then ebbed. Regaining composure, she unlocked his phone with his fingerprint, transferring 98,000 yuan, about 13 thund, to herself. In a flash, online lenders snatched nearly all of it, leaving just 900 yuan, 120. Desperation reignited. She wouldn't let defeat win. Li snapped photos of Luo's torso, bank card, and ID, plotting to use them for more loans. But the systems demanded live verification, thwarting her. Before dawn, she scoured her phone. How to destroy evidence completely. How to transfer a car or health insurance undetected. The more she schemed to cover her tracks, the clearer it became. She'd hit a dead end. By 8 a.m. on March 21st, post-murder, Li didn't flee or falter. She dressed neatly and clocked into the hospital as if nothing had happened. At 6 p.m., she returned to the rented flat and began disposing of the victim. Later, she told her lawyer she did it to stall decomposition, buying time to erase traces. The process dragged on for 20 hours, from 8 p.m. to 5 p.m. the next day. She spent over 2,000 yuan, about 280, on tools. What unfolded in that room was a gruesome, ruthless act beyond imagination. During that stretch, she darted back to her old place for clothes, ditched a stained pair of white shoes, and ransacked Luo's car for loan notes she'd signed. She found nothing. They were locked in his office safe. Later, a spinal surgery nurse uncovered those papers. She didn't stop there. To delay suspicion, Li impersonated Luo, texting his wife from his phone. When the wife asked why he hadn't come home, Li replied he was tied up with surgery out of town. That night, as the wife called, Li texted back that he was drunk and dodging the phone. But by the evening of March 20, unease gnawed at Luo's wife. She phoned the hospital to check his schedule. Nothing lined up. Sensing something off, she alerted police. The ensuing investigation swiftly peeled back the horrific truth behind Luo Peng's mysterious disappearance. Arrested, Li Fengping faced charges of murder and theft. For these crimes, she stared down the death penalty. When news broke that his daughter was entangled in the law, Li Fengping's father collapsed, disbelief shattering him. Trembling, he stammered, "Just 1 year. How could 1 year ruin my daughter like this? What has she become?" Li Fengping was born in 95, raised in a tiny village in Bobai County, Guangxi Province. Her family ranked among the village's poorest. Reaching their remote home meant a bus from Yulin City, a shuttle ride, then a long trek on foot. While most villagers lived in 2- or 3-story homes, the Li family huddled in a dilapidated single-room shack. As the eldest of 4, Li bore the weight of responsibility early. Her mother battled uterine fibroids, her frail health barring heavy work. The burden fell on her father, scraping by with odd jobs to keep them afloat. Despite their poverty, her father clung to a belief. Education was their ticket out of hardship. He'd once enrolled in middle school himself, only to drop out when money ran dry. Determined to spare his kids that fate, he vowed they'd study no matter the cost. His sacrifice paid off. None of his 4 children quit school. Beyond Li Fengping, her second sister passed into a Guangxi teachers' college, while her third sister and youngest brother attended the county's top high school. Her father once beamed with pride over his eldest. "She's got her mother's blood. Diligent, tough from the start." She studied while working part-time. When her mom fell ill, she cared for her siblings, yet still topped her class. With such grades, Li Fengping could have aimed for the county's best high school, but their finances dictated otherwise. Her father chose a technical college instead, 5 years to a job versus 7 for university. She didn't argue, picking nursing partly from years tending her mother. She became the family's shining star, one of the village's few to study in Nanning, the provincial capital. As a low-income student, she snagged a 6,000 yuan scholarship, about $8.40 per term from the Yulu Fund. Even in college, Li excelled, leading the publicity arm of the school's psychology association. Her father dreamed she'd escape poverty with her skills, land a steady job, maybe settle in a big city. He told her not to send money home, to avoid returning to the countryside for work or marriage. If all went well, he pictured her buying a house in Yulin within years, perhaps finding a city boyfriend to build a new life. But those hopes crumbled. Reality painted a harsher truth. Li Fengping was no longer the girl her father knew. As a student, she scrimped on 200 yuan bus fares, about 28, visiting home only during winter and summer breaks. After starting work, though the trip was just over an hour and under 14, she seldom returned. A chasm grew between her and her family. In 1 year, her life veered into an unthinkable abyss. On August 20th, the Guangxi Higher People's Court opened the initial trial for Li Fengping's chilling case. Throughout, she recounted her crimes with a steady voice, devoid of panic or remorse. Prosecutors framed it as a tangled mess of an illicit affair and financial woes. Li pushed back, insisting her tie to the victim stemmed not from affection or choice, but coercion and control. Killing him, she claimed, was her only escape from unbearable shame. Yet, the evidence from the investigation shredded Li Fengping's defense. All phone chats with the victim had been erased, irretrievable, but the record was clear. In the months before the murder, she'd willingly met Luo Peng at hotels, engaging with him intimately. The night prior, she'd let him into her rented flat. The court's conclusion was damning. Financial friction with Luo ignited the clash. After a heated dispute, she killed him and tried to dispose of the evidence. Her crime, marked by extreme brutality, wrought severe consequences, casting a dark shadow over society. For this, the law demanded its sternest penalty. On December 2022, the Guangxi Higher People's Court convened an appellate hearing via video, gripping public attention as Li Fengping's fate hung in the balance. Her appeal crumbled. The initial death sentence stood firm, forwarded to the Supreme People's Court for final approval. Li Fengping's case transcends mere crime. It mirrors a troubling undercurrent in modern life. From a poor girl brimming with ambition, she plummeted into gambling's abyss. A 2019 Swedish Public Security Bureau report tallied 45,000 online gambling addicts. Only 64 were women. But over the past decade, that figure has spiked. In the UK, the last 5 years saw women's gambling debts soar at twice the rate of men's. Research pins a key culprit: the rise of online lotteries. Women, often crushed by societal pressure, find little support and struggle to break free from temptation's pull. Psychologically vulnerable, they're prime targets for these snares. Li Fengping, a young nurse with promise, a steady job, and an innocent facade, seemed an unlikely fall. Yet, temptations like gambling and lotteries wield countless lures to drag even the ordinary down. Once hooked, escape is a faint hope. Take this to heart. Never trust online luck traps. Stay sharp, steer clear, shut them out. They're not just games of chance, they're a spiritual narcotic. Fall in, and your entire life risks burial. That closes today's case. What's your take? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's unpack it together. Before you go, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell to catch more iconic cases on true crime in the world.